Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be looking at a couple of really fascinating books today. Success and Luck by Robert H. Frank and the Origins of Happiness, and this one's by John F. Helliwell, Richard Layard, and Jeffrey Sachs.
Two books on two really big topics.
Yeah, and they both kind of tackle how we usually think about success and happiness, in kind of a different way.
Yeah, one really dives into just how much chance plays into success, and the other one looks at all the things that contribute to a fulfilling life, not just the money part.
Right, exactly. And Success and Luck, I gotta say, it hooked me from the start with these crazy anecdotes about how random events can totally change your life. Like Robert Frank, the author, he talks about these two near-death experiences he had. One time he was windsurfing, and it was super windy, and he got, launched into the water and trapped under the sail. He says if just a few things had been different, his whole career, everything, could have gone a totally different direction.
It is kind of wild how these, chance events can have such a huge impact, huh? But I think it's something we often overlook, you know?
Yeah, for sure. We have this thing called hindsight bias, where we tend to think that past events were way more predictable than they actually were.
It's like when you look back and you're like, oh yeah, I totally knew that was going to happen, but really at the time, it was anyone's guess.
Exactly. And that's why Frank uses these, really vivid examples to really drive the point home. There's another one I thought was super interesting about Bill Gates buying the QDOS operating system, the one, for only $50,000. Turned out to be the foundation of Microsoft. Can you imagine?
That's a steal.
Right. Crazy. And Frank's point is if any little detail in that whole process had been different, who knows what would happen to Bill Gates? Microsoft might not even exist.
Wow, that's a mind-blowing thought. Okay, so we've got Success and Luck showing us just how unpredictable success can be. But then you've got The Origins of Happiness, which is taking a totally different approach, right? Totally. They're using data and research to actually try to quantify happiness, which is kind of cool. They look at income, relationships, health, social trust, freedom, all these different factors, and measure how much they actually impact a person's well-being.
So they're going beyond just, be happy. They're actually trying to figure out what makes people happy using data.
Exactly. And they found some pretty surprising stuff.
Like what?
For example, they found that if you double your income, it might only increase your happiness by zero point 0.2 points on a scale of 0 to 10.
Seriously, 0.2.
Yeah, pretty small, right?
I would thought it would make a much bigger difference.
Yeah.
So if money doesn't equal happiness, then what does? What are some of the things that actually move the needle?
One of the biggest factors is mental health, they found. It has a way bigger impact on happiness than your physical health, which is kind of interesting. And then also having people you can rely on, like a strong social support network. That can boost your happiness by a whole 2 points.
So it sounds like both books are kind of challenging that traditional idea of success equals happiness, but they're coming at it from different angles. Success and Luck is showing us how random success can be, while The Origins of Happiness is saying that even if you do achieve success, in that traditional sense, it might not actually make you as happy as you think.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that's what makes comparing these two books so interesting, right? They're looking at the good life from totally different perspectives, but they both kind of force us to rethink some of our assumptions.
Totally. So we've got Success and Luck with the whole luck thing and The Origins of Happiness with all the data on well-being. But where do they intersect? Where do their ideas actually start to overlap?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. They both talk about this thing called positional arms races, although they kind of use different examples. Frank, in Success and Luck, he uses the analogy of bull elk. You know how they have those massive antlers?
I've seen pictures.
So each individual elk, it benefits from having bigger antlers because it helps them win fights and attract mates, right?
Oh, that makes sense.
But then because of that, the whole species becomes more vulnerable to predators.
Because they're all focused on outdoing each other. Nobody's paying attention to the bigger picture.
Exactly. And in The Origins of Happiness, they apply the same idea to things like, say, the housing market, where people are constantly trying to get a bigger and better house, not because they actually need the space, but because they want to keep up with the Joneses. It's like the cycle of escalating expectations that doesn't actually lead to more happiness.
So it's like we're all on this treadmill trying to keep up, but nobody's really getting anywhere.
Pretty much. And both books are suggesting that maybe, just maybe, true happiness is about focusing on different things. Things like meaning and purpose and connection, not just external markers of success, you know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Like, don't get me wrong, achievement is great, but it's not the whole story.
So what are we supposed to do then? If chasing those traditional markers of success isn't going to make us happy and comparing ourselves to others just fuels this arms race thing, then what's the alternative?
That's a really great question. And it's one we're going to keep exploring as we go deeper into these books. But one thing's for sure, both Frank and the authors of The Origins of Happiness, they're urging us to take a step back, and really think about what truly matters in life.
Okay, so we've got success and luck, highlighting the role of chance and the origins of happiness, digging into what actually makes people happy. It's like we're being challenged to rethink our assumptions, and look beyond those usual success narratives. I'm really curious to see where this deep dive takes us.
Me too. This is just the beginning.
So we've been talking about how both success and luck and the origins of happiness kind of challenge our usual ideas about, what really makes for a good life. It's like they're asking us to question that whole success equals happiness thing.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I find really fascinating is how both books, even though they take such different approaches, they both kind of land on this idea of gratitude as being super important for well-being.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does gratitude fit into success and luck?
Well, Frank argues that when you really recognize how much chance plays a role in your successes, it can actually make you more grateful, more humble, and even more generous. He even tells stories about people who have had near-death experiences and how they come out of it feeling this intense sense of gratitude just for being alive. It's like when you're faced with your own mortality, you suddenly appreciate everything so much more.
That makes sense. It's like when you realize how much is actually outside your control, you start to appreciate all the good stuff more. But does the origins of happiness talk about gratitude in the same way?
They don't use the word gratitude as much, but they really emphasize how important social connections and community involvement are for happiness. And I think those things are definitely linked to gratitude, right? Feeling grateful for the people in your life, for the support you get from your community.
So both books are kind of pointing towards this idea that when we recognize how interconnected we are, whether it's with other people or with these larger forces that shape our lives, it can lead to a deeper sense of happiness.
Exactly. It's about moving away from that me mindset and embracing a more like holistic perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. And both books also talk about how social comparisons can impact our happiness, right? Which is something we all do, whether we admit it or not.
Yeah.
We're constantly measuring ourselves against other people, especially these days with social media and everything.
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to avoid, right?
Yeah.
And that's where that concept of positional arms races that we talked about earlier comes back in. Remember how Frank used the analogy of bull elk with their huge antlers?
Right. He was saying how each individual elk benefits from having bigger antlers because it helps them compete, but then the whole species becomes more vulnerable because of it.
Exactly. It's a perfect illustration of how individual competition can actually lead to like collective disadvantage. And The Origins of Happiness applies this idea to stuff like the housing market, where people are always trying to get a bigger, better house, driving up prices for everyone, and nobody's actually getting any happier in the end.
It's like we're all stuck on this treadmill trying to keep up with the Joneses, but it's not actually getting us anywhere.
Yeah, it's a trap that's so easy to fall into, especially with all the images of perfect lives we see on social media. But what both these books are suggesting is that maybe true happiness comes from focusing on something else entirely, like meaning, purpose, connection, things that are actually fulfilling rather than just chasing these external markers of success.
It's like we need to be reminded of that sometimes. It's so easy to get caught up in the comparison game and lose sight of what really matters.
Yeah, totally. And this is where the policy implications of both books get really interesting. They both offer some ideas for how we could create a society that actually prioritizes well-being over just, pure economic growth.
Okay, let's talk about that. What kind of policies are they proposing?
Frank's a big proponent of a progressive consumption tax. Basically, it would discourage people from spending tons of money on luxury goods and encourage them to save and invest more. And the revenue from that tax could be used to fund public goods and services that benefit everyone.
I remember him talking about that in Success and Luck. He says it wouldn't actually make wealthy people any less happy because they'd still be able to afford everything they need and want. Just maybe a slightly smaller yacht.
Exactly. It's about shifting our priorities, away from just conspicuous consumption and towards a more balanced approach that considers the well-being of everyone.
What about the origins of happiness? What are their policy recommendations?
They take a broader approach. They're talking about a range of policies that promote things like mental health, social support, a sense of community, stuff like affordable access to mental health care, policies that support working families, and creating more opportunities for people to connect with each other.
So both books are saying we need to rethink our priorities as a society if we really want to create a world where everyone can thrive and experience genuine happiness.
Precisely. It's about looking beyond just GDP and economic growth
Mhm.
and realizing that true progress means creating a society where people feel connected, supported, valued.
It's like we're being challenged to redefine what a successful society actually looks like.
And what a successful life looks like, too.
Yeah, I like that. It seems like both books are saying that true success isn't just about what you achieve as an individual, but about creating a world where everybody has the opportunity to flourish.
And recognizing that our well-being is tied to the well-being of everyone else. It's not a zero-sum game.
This is where the conversation gets really interesting, right? We're starting to see how these seemingly separate ideas about success, luck, and happiness are all interconnected.
Exactly. And it raises some big questions about how we can take these insights and actually put them into action, both in our own lives and in the world around us.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm ready to dive into those questions. How can we use what we're learning to actually create a better future?
Me too. Let's take a quick break and then we'll jump into the final part of our deep dive where we'll explore some concrete strategies for putting all of this into practice.
All right, so we've been exploring these really deep ideas about success and luck and happiness all through these two books, Success and Luck and The Origins of Happiness. And now I'm really thinking about how we can actually use these ideas,
Mm.
Like how do we apply them to our own lives? How do we create a better future with this stuff?
Yeah, it's great to have these big ideas, but then the question is, what do we do with them?
Ex-
Well, one of the biggest takeaways for me is this idea of shifting our perspective on success, Like success and luck is telling us to acknowledge how much chance plays a role. And the origins of happiness is all about focusing on things like meaning and connection.
So instead of getting caught up in the fancy car, the big house, the corner office, both books are saying we should be focusing on things that actually make us feel good, things that are good for society too.
Right. It's about focusing on well-being, not just for ourselves, but for everyone.
I like that. And it goes back to that gratitude thing we were talking about,
Well,
right? Yeah.
exactly. When we realize that our success isn't all because of us, that there are all these other factors involved, it can make us more humble, more appreciative of what we have.
It's like taking a step back and realizing that we're all part of something bigger.
Yes. And that can be a really powerful feeling.
It is. It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the best, the richest, the whatever. You can just focus on living a life that feels good and makes sense to you. And both books really highlight how important social connections are for happiness. Like the origins of happiness, especially, they had all that research showing how strong relationships are just crucial for well-being.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that ties into this idea of creating a more compassionate and supportive society. If we want everyone to have a chance to thrive, we need to invest in the things that help people connect.
So things like affordable childcare, access to mental health care, policies that let people have a decent work-life balance.
Yes. All of that contributes to a world where people feel supported, where they have the time and space to build relationships that matter.
And this is where those policy recommendations from both books come in, right?
Yeah. Whether it's Frank's idea of progressive consumption tax or the broader approach that The Origins of Happiness talks about, they're both pushing us to rethink how we do things as a society.
It's like we need to stop just chasing economic growth and start prioritizing things like mental health, social connections, a sense of community.
Exactly. And that takes a collective effort. It's not just about what individuals do, but also about advocating for policies that create a better world for everyone.
So it's like a call to action, right?
Yeah.
We can't just sit around and hope things change. We have to actually do something.
We do. And it starts with understanding that we're all in this together. Our well-being is tied to the well-being of others. It's not a zero-sum game.
When we support things like fairness and opportunity and compassion, we're not just helping other people, we're making the world better for everyone.
Absolutely. It's about creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Man, this deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. It's challenged some of my assumptions about success and happiness, but it's also left me feeling hopeful, you know?
Me too. It's been really great exploring these books with you.
Thanks for joining me.
Of course.
And to everyone listening, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive too. We hope you got some good insights and that you feel inspired to, like, take action to make a difference. We'll see you next time.